Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I hope you guys are doing very well today. So today's video I haven't done in a hot minute and I'm really excited to have an updated one on my channel, and that is ranking my Natasha Denona palettes. So it's been a while. I think it's been like 2 years since I've uploaded this video, and of course Natasha Denona has come out with some newer palettes. So let's get started. I think you'll be surprised at where some of these land in the rankings. Okay, so I have, if I counted correctly, I have 17 Natasha Denona palettes, and those are a combination of her mini palettes, which are her like little 5-pan palettes, and then I have midi palettes, which are like, for instance, the Glam palette, and then I have one full size palette, which is the Biba palette. So I also just want to say I have 2 other Natasha Denona palettes. One that was like a BoxyCharm exclusive, and then one is the Baby Biba palette, which is a trio. I'm not counting those because those were limited edition. I don't even know if they're available. And I don't really consider those like part of the Natasha Denona line, if that makes sense, because they were a little bit different because they were included in a set or they were included in BoxyCharm. So let's go ahead and get started. So ranking in at number 17 is the Natasha Denona Zindo palette. So I have this in my collection. I purchased this during one of her Black Friday sales, and this palette, while I do think it's pretty, I always feel like Natasha Denona does a really good job with her color stories. This is just not a color story that I gravitate towards. This is just not something that speaks to me, and I just really haven't given this the time of day, which is personally maybe my fault, but it's just not a color story that I reach for. I am not someone who goes into like these coral orangey tones very often. I'm someone who, if I'm gonna go into warm tones, I'm most likely gonna go into warm browns, right? So this is just not a color story that really speaks to me, but I do have it in my collection, and this is ranking in at number 17. Then ranking in at number 16 is another one of her midi palettes, and it's the Natasha Denona Love palette. And this was one of her first ones. This was one of her first midi palettes. I want to say the first midi was the Sunrise palette and then the Love palette. I could be wrong, but this one, it is very beautiful, and it definitely ranked higher a few years ago, but now she has come out with some beautiful palettes and beautiful color stories that this one is just ranking a lot lower now. And also her formula has just greatly improved over the years, and so that also has something to do with it. Also, I do enjoy this color story. I do think it's very beautiful. I love pinks and purples. However, this is just a little bit of a disjointed color story in my opinion. I'm not as inspired by the way she formatted these colors as I am in some other palettes of hers. So yes, this is ranking in at number 16. Ranking in at number 15, I feel like this one may surprise you, and that's her Retro Glam palette. I feel like everyone was so excited about this palette whenever it released because everyone loved the mini retro palette from her. And then she came out with the midi retro palette, and it was a lot more purpley and mauve toned. And so they were like, what about the mini retro color story? Are you going to duplicate that and make it into something bigger? And she did. But for some reason, this just does not call out to me or appeal to me as much as the mini retro does. I feel like the mini retro is that beautiful muted color story that's still so beautiful in the eyes, and I feel like this one is just a lot more pastel than I was hoping it would be. I really do enjoy like the mauve row and this more like gray toned row or columns, but the mint colors, the greens, I just feel like they're a lot more pastel than I was hoping. And something to note, my palette looks different than the original Retro Glam palette from her. I redid mine because whenever Alter Ego came out with their version of this palette, I actually preferred the way that they set up the eyeshadows more than she did. So I redid mine to kind of match the Sakura palette from Alter Ego because that's just more visually appealing to me. It makes more sense for me to view these colors in this layout than the original version. But yeah, ranking ranking in at number 15 is the Retro Glam palette from her. Ranking in at number 14, that is the Mini Gold from her. And this one I haven't had in my collection very long. I got it whenever it was on sale. I have to be very careful because this shade is kind of broken, but this one is very pretty. I really enjoy greens. It's one of my favorite colors to play around with on the eyes. And this one is very beautiful. It really is, but it's just not, again, a mini or a palette of hers that stands out in my collection. So I did have to rank it a little bit lower. All right, and ranking in at number 13 is one of her newer palettes. She came out with this last year in 2023, and it is the Yucca palette from her. And this one was very loved by so many people because, again, so many people love this green color story. And I do enjoy this palette. I really do. It has nothing to do with the formula. It has nothing to do with the color story, but it has everything to do with just how much I am gravitating towards colors like this. That's not very often. I am much rather going for something a little bit more muted when it comes to color. I'm going for something that's obviously more neutral, that's gonna be more browns, things like that, taupes, rosy tones, things like that. But this is still a really nice palette, and it does perform well. I will say this has a funky smell that I've never encountered before with Natasha Denona's palettes. Mine smells kind of chemically. It's honestly a little bit concerning, but I didn't have any type of irritations or things like that when I did use this. But this is just not one of her palettes that I'm using very often or consistently, but it does perform well, and I do enjoy this color story. It's just not one that I'm using very often. Then we have a palette that I actually don't have in my collection right now because I have it at my mom's house, and that is the Mini Glam palette. So ranking it at number 12 is the Mini Glam palette. I'll put a picture of it here on the screen. This is a nice one, but it's just, again, not something that stands out. These are very weird tones in my opinion. These are not super cool tones, but they're not browns. It's almost like they're olivey browns. It's really interesting, the types of colors that are in the Mini Glam palette, but it performs well. It does look good on the eyes. It's just not my favorite palette from her, but I ranked it a little bit higher because it's still more everyday than some of these other palettes that I mentioned. Ranking in at number 11, I have the Mini Love palette from her, and this one is beautiful. This one is so pretty. I much prefer these tones in the Love palette than I did in the original Love palette from her. These are just a little bit more wearable. They're not as bright. They're still giving you some color on the eyes, but it's not gonna be super intense like you would get in the Love palette. So this one is beautiful. I honestly have nothing bad to say about it. It's just, again, I feel like a broken record. How often am I reaching into this palette? That's really what took into consideration why it's ranking where it is, because again, this is at number 11, but again, it's still a really good palette, beautiful color story, performs well. I love this hot pink packaging. It's just not one I'm gravitating towards regularly. All right, then we're at number 10. So ranking in at number 10 is the Mini Biba palette. This one is beautiful, you guys. I am so in love with the shade in the middle, this shimmer shade here. It is so beautiful. I really enjoy this one. However, one gripe that I have with this palette, which it honestly makes sense with the original Biba as well, but this is very matte heavy. You have 4 matte shades and 1 shimmer shade, which doesn't really bother me, but I think the issue that I have with these matte shades is that these are a lot more peachy toned. They do not really line up with the Biba in my opinion, but I understand that what she does sometimes is she tries to not exactly replicate the palette, but make a nice extension of the palette that she's going off of. And I do feel like that was successfully done with this palette, but because again, I'm not reaching towards peachy tones very often, I feel like this is one that I kind of tend to overlook in my collection, but I do really enjoy that shimmer shade. I think that's kind of the star of the show, and I should give this one some more use, but that's ranking in at number 10. Then ranking in at number 9 is the Mini Nude from her. So this one is so beautiful. This one is very well loved. I feel like so many people really enjoy this palette from her. her, because this was the palette that she had first before a lot of her other palettes that was very neutral, that was very just everyday friendly, very perfect for traveling. And I do agree with that. I feel like you have everything that you need in this one palette. Even though it's only 5 shades, I feel like it is just very versatile. I feel like you have your mid-tone, you have your deeper brown, and then you have 3 beautiful shimmers to choose from, a beautiful kind of inner corner shade right here. So yeah, I mean, this one I feel like was laid out very nicely. And again, for only it being 5 shades, I feel like it's very versatile. So I really enjoy the Mini Nude. I have traveled with it before and was pleasantly surprised with how much I used it and with how just I fell in love with a lot of the looks. So that is ranking in at number 9. Then ranking in at number 8, I mentioned this palette earlier, and it is the Mini Retro palette. This definitely ranked very high in years past, but it's not one that I'm reaching for all the time. And I think it's because, again, it's a very unique color story, but when you get uniqueness, you also get not something that you may reach for every day. And that's kind of my issue with this palette. And it's not a bad thing. It's just me personally. I tend to always stick with neutrals for work and for every day, but this is absolutely stunning. I love, 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 love the shade Galaxia here. This one right here, this is such a beautiful shimmer shade. And yes, I love this one. I really should pull this one out because this is beautiful. So yes, that is ranking in at number, what was it? Number 8 was the Mini Retro. Then we have number 7, and that's one of my other minis, and it's the Mini Star palette. I really like this one. And going back to what I was saying about the Mini Nude palette from her, I feel like even though this is only 5 shades, I can go in so many directions with this palette. I could do the green on the lid. I could do this really beautiful blue-green like duochrome on the lid. I could go in with this beautiful like taupe color on the lid. And then this is a perfect mid-tone and a beautiful like outer corner shade. So I just feel like this is a really, really well thought out 5-pan palette. And again, I took this on vacation with me last year and I was so happy with this palette. I didn't feel like I was missing anything else while I was away. So I do enjoy this one. This is definitely my favorite mini from her just because of how versatile it is. And this is still very neutral in my opinion with some pops of color. All right, and then ranking it at number 6 is the Midi Bronze palette from her. This is beautiful, and this is still to this day one of my favorite Natasha Denona palettes. I love this one so much. This one is the most beautiful summer transitioning into fall eyeshadow palette. Of course, because these are just browns, you can use these anytime throughout the year, but this is beautiful. I will say you have to like warm tones with this palette. You have to be okay with some of your looks coming out very, very similarly. That doesn't bother me though, because regardless, I still love the eyeshadow look that I come up with this palette. Again, I love this for kind of like a sultry date night type of look. I love using the shade Deep Dive as a liner because it's one of her cream to powder formulas. So I feel like it's really nice just to kind of throw on as a faux liner, if you will. I love this palette. I do. I use it every single summer and fall season. This is one of the palettes, like I have so many palettes within my collection that unfortunately they go unused sometimes throughout the year because I have so many palettes and it's just sometimes impossible for me to get through everything. But this is a palette that never goes unused when the years go by. So I love that one. Then we are in our top 5, you guys. I hope that you are able to guess some of these. And like I said, I think I will surprise some of you. But ranking it at number 5 is the My Dream palette. I love this one. This one is so beautiful. I feel like this is one of her most underrated palettes in my opinion. I feel like everybody talks about the bronze palette, the glam palette, right? But this one is such a versatile color story. You have so many different things that you can do with this one because you have different mid-tones with like a peach color with the taupey colors, the lighter browns, but then you have really beautiful like outer corner shades as well because you have like the plums that you can go with. You have these more rusty tones that you could go with. You of course just have a nice deep brown. You even have a black to deepen up with as well. And something I've noticed is I don't feel like she includes black very often within her palettes. I feel like she always kind of opts for a deeper brown or something like that. So having a black from her is really nice to have as well. And then the shimmer shades are so beautiful in this palette, and the fact that she even has a really nice that might be a trio chrome, to be honest, is really nice as well. So I love this one. I really enjoy the looks that I come up with when I use this palette. So this is very underrated of hers in my opinion, and I definitely recommend trying it out. But yeah, this one is ranking in at number 5 from her. All right, and ranking in at number 4, I personally feel like my number 4 and my number 3 are kind of interchangeable because I love them that much. But ranking in at number 4 is my retro palette, and I love this one, you guys. Again, I feel like this is one of her more underrated palettes because, again, I just feel like her newer palettes tend to gain the spotlight very quickly for good reasons, right? But I do think that this is still one of my favorite Natasha Denona palettes of all time. I love mauvey tones so much, and I love that she did that for us, but she also included some really beautiful taupes. I love mixing these taupes with these berry tones. It makes such a beautiful look in my opinion. And yeah, I've been very happy and pleased with this palette, and it's one that I currently just reach for very often. So I love this one. Ranking in at number 4 is the retro palette. Then ranking in at number 3, you probably guessed it, hopefully, maybe, I don't know, is the Glam palette. And like I said, I feel like this and the retro palette 3 and 4 are kind of interchangeable because I love both of them so much, but the Glam palette is very loved in her line. This is a cool toned lover's dream, but it's still neutral. It's still neutral. So if you love cool tones, but you're also someone who appreciates having some neutrals as well, this is a great palette for you for that reason. I love that this still looks a little bit more neutral and a little bit more taupey on the eyes, even though it is very cool toned. I love it. It performs so well. This is so beloved from her for a reason. It's beautiful. I love it. This was ranking in at number 3. Then ranking in at number 2, and I think this is where this could surprise you, to be honest. Ranking in at number 2 is my Biba palette. It's gotten dethroned, which is very sad, but that's okay. That is okay. But this is the Biba palette from her. I still adore this palette. I still love this palette, but it's definitely gotten replaced, and you'll see by what. I have to be careful because my black shade will fall out, but I still love and adore this palette so much. I still love all of the matte shades that she has in this palette. My favorite shimmer shade, honestly, I feel like of life, is the shade Monroe. I just love it so much. I feel like this is everything that you need in a neutral palette, in an everyday palette. This has warm tones, it has neutrals, it has cool tones. So if you're wanting something that's everyday and you are okay with spending a little bit of money, I highly recommend this one. I need to buy a backup ASAP because I haven't seen this on Sephora, and I haven't seen it on Ulta either. It's only on Natasha Denona's site, which freaks me out because I'm so afraid that she's going to discontinue this. So I need a backup ASAP because I got this in 2019 and I need another one. But I love this. I love this so much. This is seriously one of my babies in my collection, and I still love it. But surprisingly, my number one Natasha Denona palette in my collection is the I Need A Nude palette from her. This is gorgeous. This is so beautiful. And I feel like with this one, right, what really went into consideration with this palette when I was going against the Biba palette, when I was doing my rankings. It was mainly the fact that these are so muted, and I just love those types of colors for every day. I feel like with the Biba palette, if you're not careful, you can definitely get a little bit more sultry than maybe you were wanting. You could definitely get a little bit more of an intense eye look, and some days you're just not wanting that. You know, some days you just want something a little bit more muted and a little bit more understated on the eyes, and I feel like this palette easily helps you accomplish that. I love the shimmer shades in here. I love just all of the taupes in here. Such a stunning palette from her, and I'm so happy with this one. I also really enjoy the packaging. I love what she's doing with her new Midi palettes, because she amped up the price by a couple or a few dollars, but at least the packaging is also getting an upgrade because they feel a little bit more, you know, durable, a little bit more sturdy, and a lot heavier as well, because she's kind of like thickening this outer layer. But anyways, the I Need A Nude is so beautiful. I still love the Biba though. I still love the Biba, but those are all of the Natasha Denona palettes. I have 17 so I technically have 19 Natasha Denona palettes, but I wanted to just rank these 17 because of the reasons I stated earlier. But I hope that you enjoyed. What are your top Natasha Denona palettes? I would love to hear from you. Are your top Natasha Denona palettes the same as mine? I would love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Also, I would love for you to subscribe and be a part of my YouTube channel family here. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will go ahead and see you in my next video. Bye.